Imagination is part of our motivation for doing things. Remember when I talked about the stimulus response and how imagination changes my response depending on what I'm imagining? So that makes me want to help managers understand 4 levels of motivation, because I think we're all interested in motivation. I'm even interested in self-motivation. What keeps me from accomplishing some things that I thought I dearly wanted to accomplish? What in raising children, don't you care about motivation? Motivation. We're all concerned, I think, about what is the best motivation to get somebody to do anything. So let me suggest 4 levels of motivation. Now, if it's a level, it means that some motivator is stronger than another. And we're going to arrange these from the weakest motivator to the most powerful. Are you with me there? Okay, so here they are. Number 1 is the level of compliance. Compliance is the same word we use with our children. I mean, we don't use the word compliance with our children. The synonym we use for compliance at home is obedience, right? You will mind me. You will not turn on that TV. And that is compliance when they don't turn on the TV, but that's also obedience. At work, we like the word compliance. So if you boss pretty much at the level of compliance, then what you're really trying to do is use your position power to either threaten, bribe, or coerce people into doing sometimes things that they wouldn't do if it weren't for you insisting that they do it. That's a rather low level of commitment, because I can do it because you require it, and I'm not a bit committed. Which means if you're gone, I probably won't do it if you don't see me, see? So, all right, that is one level of motivation, but it's got to be the weakest. Now, you could fire me, and that sounds pretty strong, but it's still weak how? In that, psychologically, I haven't bought in. And no motivator is very strong if I haven't bought in. So let's say I have bought in. I've bought into service excellence. I've bought into treating people with courtesy. I've bought into our strategy of saying, is there anything else I can do for you? All of these things. I bought into the fact that I'm going to start greeting everybody in the hallways. You know, I've bought in all around. So then what keeps me on track is probably willpower. Willpower is when we have bought into a set of values ourselves, and when we don't feel like doing the value, we will do what? We will do it anyway because we know we should. You promise to exercise every morning. The alarm goes off, and you don't feel like it. You shut off the alarm. You say, oh, just let me go back to sleep, please. But instead, you do what? You get up, you go out, you do the exercise. You got a victory gained by not compliance, but by willpower. Another word for willpower is self-discipline. Not somebody else disciplining you like is in compliance. It is self-discipline. Goes with that word, the opposite of compliance. Now, most people think those are the only 2 real motivators that we have. But there are 2 more that get more powerful than these. These are the most commonly used. But here they are. Number 2, this one is the one we've been talking about today. Imagination is more powerful than willpower because it is through imagination that our energy comes from emotions instead of our values. It's interesting that your values there's no emotion attached to what you should or shouldn't do. There's only emotion attached to what you feel like or don't feel like doing because of what? Because of your emotions somewhere, see? Now, if we can align our emotions with what we should, then we want to do them. That's kind of where I'm going, and that's done through imagination. And the best questions for imagination, I think, is especially when we see somebody, for instance, that's acting like a jerk, instead of thinking that that's a jerk and reacting like a jerk back to them, we might say, what would make me act that way? And it wouldn't be because I was a jerk. Or, how would I feel if? Or, this could be me or my family member. Anytime we trigger one of those, then through imagination, our response is going to be natural and not forced. Okay? Finally, there's habit. That's the strongest one of all because it's based on our knee-jerk responses to situations in life. So let's take a little illustration that'll walk through all of these just for the fun of it. Let's say that I'm out on the freeway and it's backed up and I'm trying to get to this hospital where I'm speaking, and And I know how to get there, and I know where to park and all of that, but some reason we're backed up. Nobody's moving. I'm getting more and more anxious as the time goes by, and I see I'm not even going to make it on time, and my anxiety level is creeping up, and then one lane starts to move pretty nicely, but it's not my lane. Would that make me even more stressed? Yes. In fact, they're starting to just zip along. Zip, zip, zip. They're going by, and we're stuck right here. And I find I'm just so desperate, I finally dart in over here. You know, a poor guy behind me has to screech on his brakes, and I hope there isn't any backup, but I have got to get to my appointment. And so I get over here, and I no more than get over here, then what happens? Comes to a stop. And who moves? The lane I was just in, right? You've kind of been there before. And so now this lane is zipping. Well, let's say I did this a couple of times. What's happened to my stress now? I have stayed in the same place, and everybody else has gotten on down the road, 300 or 400 yards. I'm probably pretty angry at myself. We'll add a little more stress to our hypothetical situation. I look in my rearview mirror, and I see a guy passing everybody on the shoulder, on the side of the road. And I think to myself, there's been no on-ramp here. Who do you think you are? And so I say, not in front of me. And I close that gap. Now, this is hypothetical. I want you to try to keep this in mind as I go. I close that up in front of me, and I think, he doesn't want this place in front of me. He's got a space down there in front of that truck. These trucks that leave a nice long space. And I think, okay, what if I stick two wheels out here? And I force him into line, right? So I got my two wheels out here. He moves one way, I move one way. I move the other like this, and I've taken him on today. And I picture everybody, my imagination said everybody's cheering me on. Go get those guys, those guys that cut line, those jerks. Get in there and get them. And so I keep going back and forth, and he gets around me anyway. And he honks as he goes by with a rude honk. And I'm just beside myself, and I think, do I want to chase him down? No, I would never do that. So I get back in line, and I'm still seething. But once in a while, fate does something nice for us. I'm hoping it'll just catch me up to this guy later on, and I can be in that zip, zip, zip line, and he's stuck over here that he tried so hard to get into my line. Wouldn't you just love to go by and just smile and say, hi, have a nice day, right? So we get to where our destination is, and there he is. He's parking in handicap parking, and I think that is just the last straw. I know security down here at this, and so I stop for a minute, see if he's really, there's no sign on his car. He gets out of his car, runs around to the other side, opens the door, picks up a little baby wrapped in a blanket, and runs into the hospital. Now, reality didn't change in this story. What changed? My perception, my imagination, my interpretation of what was going on is what changed. What do you think happened to my feelings when my interpretation, my imagination changed? What happened to my feelings? They changed instantly. I didn't have to work on my anger. See what I'm saying? I didn't have to work on this. Why? Because one flash of a different imagination and the whole thing changed. You can duck under this. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. It's not that. Have I gone a little too long? Is that what has happened here? Did we not? I've been here the whole time. I haven't, and I've got a slight prostate. No, never mind. So anyway, if I can do it, I figure anybody can do it up here. But the point was, okay, so what is the point that I made in this story? I made the point that my imagination in the first place got me into trouble. My feelings changed when my imagination changed. Once I know that principle, I know that the way to change my behavior is best done through my imagination, not through my value system. Because here's how it looks the other way. I start to stick two wheels over here, and I see a cop over there. Oh, well, excuse me. And I bring my two wheels back in, and I'm just fine. Now, which one was that at work? Compliance, all based on authority, right? Threats of threat or... I start to stick two wheels over here. And I say, Fred, now is this any way for you to behave? Didn't you just meditate this morning and say, I'm not going to let people get my goat. I'm not going to be a type A today. I'm going to smell the roses. I'm going to forgive people. All right. And I bring this back in here. And I've lived up to my values that I want to espouse. And I want to treat other people the way I want to be treated. And I bring it back in here. But he's still a jerk. See the point? I got a victory. I start to stick two wheels over here. And I asked that first question. What would make me pass everybody on the side of the road today? And there's no way to answer that question except through what? Imagination. It's not a moral question. What would make me act that way? It's not a moral question. It's not a compliance question. It's not about what's right or wrong. Could you get a ticket for doing this? None of those questions. It is simply about what would be going on in me if that was me? And I would say to myself, well, if they called me and said my wife had a heart attack and she was in the ED, please get down here as fast as you can. We don't have time to talk about it on the phone, and neither do you. And do you think I would be in a panic and be in that car, and I'd be down the road, and if somebody got in my way, I'd get out there on the shoulder, and if they finally got around them, I'd honk at them too, like you really slowed me down. I'd get down there, and I'd get in, and I would get down there, and if I couldn't find a parking place, I'd go ahead and take the chance I get a ticket for handicap parking, and I'd put that car in. You see what I'm saying? I would act exactly like that person under certain conditions, which I would always forgive in myself, but I automatically assume that no one else is in that position. Now, you might say, yeah, but I have a highly rationalization mind. You know, the left brain kicks in and says, not 1 in 50 is in a life and death struggle when they come barreling down the side of the road. You know, I have that voice inside of me. But I also have enough empathy on the other side of my brain that says, yeah, you're probably right, but it would be just my luck. The day I stick my wheels out there, it's going to be a person like me who needs that clear, and now I'm going to do it. Would I take the chance for 1 in 50? See, that's still dealing with my left brain who says, you know, not 1 in 50. I don't think 1 in 50 is very good odds to be taking on the world. If you had 1 in 50 odds to win a $1 million jackpot down here, you'd be down there playing that thing all the time, right? Because within 50 times, you'd get that $1 million jackpot, see? So we would consider that a very good odds that it could happen, even though it sounded when I said it, not 1 in 50 is really in a life and death. Depends on what you're talking about when you're talking odds, right? That's all I mean here. Now, habit, of course, was me starting to stick my 2 wheels over there, see? That was the thing that I'm trying to conquer with the others. And if you still doubt that imagination is more important, more powerful than willpower, let me give you one more quick imagination exercise. Let's pretend that those tables that we had here yesterday were half as big. So you can pretend anything through imagination, right? And you've seen those little narrow ones. You know, if they had been narrower, we'd had more room in here, right? But they were the double-sized table. You've seen the little narrow ones where you just sit one, you can only set one person there. And so they're this wide. And we've strung these tables up from here to the parking. And we've told you that if you will walk on the tables instead of on the sidewalk, all the way to your car, from here to your car, we'll give you $5. You think that, see, the imagination, you can do dumb things, right? So let's imagine that you do this. And you walk to the car, you get $5. But when you get there, we give you a piece of paper. And we say, please read this. You take it and you look at it, and it says on the top, earn $1,000 doing the same thing on April 25. Oh, really? $1,000 doing the same thing? Yes. So you get it, you cross off your date. You know, not very many of you make $1,000 a day, and you think that's a good day to take off work, right? And arrange for one of those paid leave days. And so it says, and you have to show up at this address, and you have to look on a map because the address is quite a ways away. And when you finally get there, I don't know where we'll be for this address, but we're in a pretty large town. And you come to the address. It's a very big building. And you come up to the door and you say, then there's somebody you know there. You're looking for how to win $1,000? Yes, I am. Well, go up, please, to the 44th floor. And you'll find Mr. Lee up there with your $1,000. Oh, I go up there to the 44th floor. And when I come off the elevator, there's Mr. Lee isn't there. An assistant is there. And you're looking for Mr. Lee and the $1,000? Yes. Well, back in that room, please. Just go right into that room. You'll find him on the other side of the room. You come in the room. There's Mr. Lee on the other side of the room. And Fred, of course, to you guys. And then you get over there, and you say, well, I don't see any of these tables you talked about. Oh, well, we changed this dynamics a little bit here, but it's essentially the same thing. If you just look out the window, please. And so we look out the window, and sure enough, there's a plank exactly that wide, and it goes all the way from the 44th floor of this building to the 44th floor of that building. And it's the same situation, nice firm, there's no wind today, we picked a windless day for you. And so now all you have to do is just march across the street, 44 floors in the air, to the other side, and there'll be somebody there with your $1,000. Now here's my point. You think I lost my point. Here's my point. All the willpower in the world could not make most of you cross that for $1,000. All the willpower in the world. Why? Because imagination is more powerful than willpower. Your imagination overrides willpower. What does that mean in patient care? Just this. We've talked a lot about empathy. I believe that let's back up and do two things that I said yesterday, and I'll tack a third one on, that is the I believe part. I want to back up, just as a quick review. I'll say the first one for you. I said the enemy of competence is not incompetence, but, I don't expect anybody to remember this word, but if you do, say it now. The enemy of competence is not incompetence. It was on that list of outcomes at the very bottom. It is not incompetent people doing something incompetent. It is competent people, what? Being careless. Do you remember that? Okay. So the enemy of competence is not incompetence, usually in a hospital setting. It is carelessness. And so our safety systems that we build in this redundancy so that we go catch something, we're not trying to catch incompetent people. We're trying to catch mistakes made out of carelessness. And you might have been careless, but I'll be careful. And I'll catch it for you. And so we have 2 or 3 ways to catch something, like reading a person's bracelet, for instance. Then on the other side of that, on perceptions, I said the enemy of courtesy is not rudeness, it is what? Right, avoidance, right? You miss all those opportunities to be courteous. It isn't like we have a lot of rude people to worry about, but we probably have a lot of people who practice avoidance unintentionally, mostly, unaware that they are, right? And that's our enemy. Now I got one more parallel with that has to do with compassion, because the first one is about competence. Remember our 3-tiered cake? Competence on the bottom. The next one was courtesy. The enemy of that is avoidance. Competence, it's carelessness. Now we come to compassion, and since it has to be real and come from a real place, and we've spent a good deal of time about how do we do this and how important it is and how imagination is it, then I would say over here, the enemy of compassion, which keeps you from coming from a real place, is, this will surprise you, I think, judging. Judging. Here's why. The minute I think that you brought this on yourself out of bad choices that I would never have made myself because I know better and you should have, what happens to empathy? It's gone just about that fast. We all can empathize with the victims of 9/11. Why? Because none of them brought that on themselves. That is a horrible tragedy that shocks everybody. Can we have that same compassion for somebody who's dying of liver disease when his doctor has told him for 20 years he drinks too much and he needs to stop being an alcoholic? Not as easy. Somebody smoked 4 packs a day for 30 years, not as easy. You've known about this for plenty of years, you see. Somebody has AIDS for a lifestyle that I don't really approve of and would have never chosen myself. You know, and it was needles, for instance, and drug addiction and this kind of thing. And so then I pass judgment. An obese person, 400 pounds. Is it easy to be empathetic with them when we are imagining how much they must be eating? And how would you eat that much? And if my imagination is all about how grotesque this person looks and how much they must be eating and why in the world couldn't they just control themselves, where can you get any compassion out of thoughts like that? Right? That's our enemy. There's a person named Liz Jaswick that goes around the country. Have any of you heard Liz Jaswick speak? Well, you are isolated. I don't know. How did you ever hear about me? I don't know. Right, you know, yes, kiddingly, yes. But Liz Jaswick used to run an emergency department that went from the 14th percentile to the 95th percentile in about a year. And it was hard to get her to do that. She said, the only reason I did it is that I was told I would be fired if I didn't. You know, people say, well, how did you learn to do all that in a year? Well, I was told I'd be fired. You learn pretty fast, you know. And you have no time to go running to any seminars. You just learn it by doing it right on the job. She said, our nurses used to think they could cure teenage pregnancy by rolling their eyes. And you know, that's it. Don't you think that a patient knows when we're rolling our eyes, even if we're not physically rolling our eyes? They can tell, because we can't mask what comes out of our right brain anymore very much better than we can mask blushing. Again is my favorite example of that. See what this means then, that I think I was talking, what was I talking about when I built up to there? Judging, thank you. You can see why judging. I remember my wife twice that I can think of just like this, I can remember so well, when she's caught me on this, because she's easily a more empathetic person than I am. To me, she's just the epitome of empathy. And I'm sure that's a big reason why she went into nursing, is because it's such a wonderful vehicle for an empathetic person. But I can remember that one time we were just in a restaurant, and my cousin was across the table. And my cousin's same age as I was. And a kid came in that most of us would call a freak. In the words where you do this to yourself, right? He had his head shaved on one side, and spiky sort of purple-green stuff coming out the other side, okay? And then he had rings in every place you could stick a ring in, you know. So in his lips, he's got rings, and in his nose. And he has chains all over, and he's got black on, and he's got a satanic message on his sweatshirt. And he's clonking in to this place in these boots and looking like a freak. Now, you know, I burst out laughing because I burst out laughing because he only weighed about 95 pounds and it didn't matter, you know. I mean, if he was a great big guy, I'd have waited until he went by, you know. But when he's just a scrawny kid, you know, I bust out laughing. And so did my cousin. And he made a silly remark, and I cracked up even more. And I looked at my wife, and she wasn't laughing at all. And I looked at her and I said, what? Mira said, what? What? He didn't hear me. She said, that's not the point. She said, Fred, that is some mother's son. That is some poor mother's boy that you're laughing at. Well, you know, I do have a boy, not too much older than that one, who was making some choices in his life that I didn't approve of, and was running with some friends that I didn't approve of, and had gotten himself in trouble with the law that I didn't approve of. And I realized when she said that is our son is about this far from being there, and you're laughing. And it was no joke to her. Why? I could judge. She empathized with the mother, to be sure, because she's a mother. And how far are any of us as parents from knowing the choices our children will make and being sure that we can control those? Not very far. The other time that I think of is she had a co-worker, a nurse who had a heart attack just outside the emergency department, and if it weren't for the fact that it happened there, they probably wouldn't have saved her life. So they rushed her into the emergency department. She came back quite distraught because of the news that day and so forth. And so she was ventilating about how distressing this was. She's trying to share this, her little bit of her grief and distress with me. And my first question, I'm ashamed to say, was, first of all, how old was she? What difference does that make when you think about it? And she said, well, I don't know. I think she's probably in her early 50s maybe. And then, of course, I said, oh, that is way too young to be having a heart attack. So that didn't quite get me off the hook. So what do you think my second question was? Was she overweight? And then she looked at me and she said, Fred, what difference does that make? And what is she saying in that? Are you trying to give me a reason to not feel what I'm feeling for this person who had a tragedy today? And I suddenly realized if I analyzed myself, that's probably what I was doing. I was trying to make an excuse that allowed me to distance myself from something she did not want distance from in being a compassionate person. That's what we're talking about, judging and its relationship to this. Where I want to go with this is here. We already said this. It's nonverbal, eye contact. So I went through this one already without using the overhead. But I wanted to use this with you. I want to tell a little story with this that I think crystallizes some of the things I'm talking about. Do you have this slide in there, in yours? Yeah. These 4 quadrants I see as this. Your imagination is always at work. Well, let me back this up. Do you believe that you're always communicating whether you're aware of it or not? Yes. Okay. So then would we also not agree that your imagination is always at work whether we know what it is or not, right? It is always. So that means something that is on in your imagination is always being communicated. So that when you nod like you did just now, I take it that your imagination is where I am and what I'm talking about, and you're affirming me on that. I don't imagine that yours off mind is somewhere else. So can that be seen by the patient? Yes. Generally speaking, if the patient is conscious, of course. So let's just say that since your imagination is somewhere, let's say that it is either going to be negative or positive. And you are either going to be tuned into the patient or tuned out from the patient. Okay? Does that all make, is that clear? So we've got tuned in and tuned out, negative or positive. So if we go up into this quadrant, what does it look like or feel like to the patient if you are tuned out but it's not negative? Well, you probably look like a person whose mind is somewhere else. If you're down here, you are tuned out, but you're tearing your hair out emotionally, then it looks like our little picture like this. Are we with me there? Okay. Where I want to go next is this one. Now, I had the experience of being in this situation when I was told that my mother had been in an automobile accident. It had killed my father. She had gone through surgery. No, she was going into surgery, flown by helicopter to UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento. She lives in Napa Valley, by the way. My mother does. And so when I got this news, I was a basket case, because my father had just been killed, and my mother was touch and go. They said she had a broken neck, broken ribs, broken sternum, broken leg in 3 places, the other broken in half. She's 87 years old. So when you put all that together, it's like, no, she was 84. I take that back. She was 84 at the time. And so you put that together, you have doctors saying, well, she is 84. We're going to do our best. So I'm on my way, flying on a plane from Denver, Colorado to Sacramento in order to be by my mother's side. And I remember imagining when I got on that plane back in 1997 when this happened. I thought to myself, what are they going to do when I come to that ICU? Is that going to be one of those hospitals that chases me out every 50 minutes and says, you got 10 minutes with your mother and then you got to leave? And I thought, brother, they're going to be dealing with the wrong guy when I get there. And I thought, now that's a hill I'll die on. I often say to my daughter, is this a hill you want to die on, honey, when she's having some altercation with somebody? So I turned this on. So I finally turned this on my side and said, okay, that's a hill that I will die on this hill. I'll take it to the director of nurses. I'll take it to the doctor. I'll go all the way as high as I can. And if I have to, I'll hang on to the bed and make them get security and drag me out of there. This is what they're facing if they think they can just quietly say, you need to leave now. So I'm all worked up. I haven't even got there, and I'm already worked up about these people and how they're going to treat me. And I'm going to tell them about places that don't do this, and the research that shows that, this not only doesn't harm the patient, it actually is beneficial, and the length of stay goes down, and all this stuff that research has shown. So I'm ready to do my battle because I know something about this subject, and you're not going to treat me this way. And besides, I'm a family member. So I'm thinking these thoughts. I ring the buzzer. They buzz me in. I go down to my mother's room, and there's a wall of glass where you can look in, floor-to-ceiling glass where you can look in there. So before I even went in the door, I could see the bed, I could see a nurse standing in there, I could see all this equipment, banks of lights go on and everything, and the nurse was charting something in the room, and I thought to myself, now I don't want the nurse to know I got in there, but how do I do that? Because I don't want her timing me for how long I was there. So I slipped in quietly behind my nurse, and I saw my mother. I was shocked to see a halo on her head from her broken neck, and shocked to see how swollen she looked. And then the worst thing was to hear this breathing device which told me that she's on life support. You know, when a patient when a family member suspects that you're on life support, that's panic time, right? It's like, did I even make it here? If she's on life support, does it mean that she's unconscious and will never wake up again? Did I miss a chance to say goodbye to her, that I love her, or anything? And so these are the thoughts in my mind when I reached down and took her hand that I could find just barely sticking out of the covers, and I squeezed her hand, hoping she would squeeze back, and she did. And when she squeezed back, she not only squeezed back, it was quite firm, which gave me some courage. And not only was it quite firm, but she hung on. Like, don't leave me, don't leave me. With her hanging on to my hand, the nurse turned to me. And I thought, give it your best shot. I didn't say anything, that's what I was thinking, you know. And the nurse looked at me and she said, my, you should see what your touch just did to your mother's vital signs. It's fantastic. She needs you here all the time, and so do we. Could she have said a better thing? To me, that's a sample of a person who is tuned in, knows everything going on, notices that when the sun comes in, touches his mother's hand, there it is, you can see the blood pressure, you can see the pulse, you can see what it is that reduces pain. You're worried about her pain, there went her pain down. You can just see the signal of it. When this happened, why not give that gift? The gift of, you're part of our team, the gift of empathy. Your mother needs you here all the time, and we do too. It was like a bouquet to me. My mother has since more than survived. She has done so well. She's gone through rehab, and she's had a couple of other operations, but in the end, right now, today at 90, well, she's not quite 90, 89 years old, she has led a trip into China. She's walks 2-3 miles every morning before breakfast. In fact, she'll skip breakfast rather than skip her walk, and she has no residual problems with her neck or all these splints that they put in, these steel bars and everything in her leg. I just tell you that so that you know that the end of the story is not it isn't pertinent necessarily to the part I was wanting to emphasize, is this one. Here's what they teach at Disney, and I want to show you the difference between the left brain not using imagination approach to what I would rather teach and what I taught years ago, and that I got from a patient representative's handbook. Patient representatives deal with angry people all the time, and so it was from that, and I thought it was the best model to communicate that I've ever seen. It isn't on your page. I took it off and tossed it this morning, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, because I want you just a little more active than it would have been. This is what we were taught. We were taught to learn this little acronym, LAST, at Disney. Now, I'm going to tell that there's a better way, but I just want to show you the contrast. This is typical of what most organizations in the service sector teach. But they're not in the, not so much in the other. But this is at Disney. Listen, apologize, solve the problem, and thank them. Last, listen, apologize, solve, and thank. Sounds like you could remember that pretty well. I personally have a problem with acronyms, especially in a crisis situation, to try to remember anything, even if it's these 4 things. If it isn't hooked some way to your imagination, you try to remember an acronym, LAST, you'll probably get lost. Was it FIRST? F-I-R, what was it, Fulham? No, what was it? And so you can't remember where it went, and then you say the first one, and what was A, what was A, what was A, I don't remember. You see, that can happen in a stressful situation. Better to have something to hook your brain on that is more like a picture, because we remember pictures for a long time. So if you would, please, turn to the back page of this. In other words, just turn your pamphlet over so you have a white blank page in front of you. And you are going to make a kind of big bell-shaped curve looking curve horizontally facing you. And I'm going to put one up here so you'll see it, but just a bell-shaped curve down here. And here's what it should look like. Here's the curve. It looks like this. All right? In this curve, there's several stages. They go like this. You don't have to draw these in right now. I'm just going to show you that this is where we're headed. You can draw them in as we go, or you can just write the word that we want there so that you don't even have to have a line. So this is a curve, but it's not a bell-shaped curve. What we're going to imagine is this is a rocket taking off. Are you with me there? Does this look like a rocket taking off? It's a ballistic curve. Think of it that way. Here's the rocket takes off, burns its fuel, and when it comes down on the other side, it comes back down to Earth. And for us, Earth is rational behavior. This is a person going ballistic. Have you ever heard of them going ballistic? Isn't that a picture of ballistics, right? Here they got their fuse lit, wham, they take off. Our goal is not to refuel this so that it escalates, right? That would be the worst thing you could do, is escalate this. What you want to do is somehow turn this corner so that they come back down to Earth. Each of these stages is just like the stages of a rocket. We're going to put what the angry person does on the outside, our response, or what we say or do on the inside. Inside is who? Us. Outside is what the angry person does. At this first stage, when they get their fuse lit, some people have short fuses, get them lit a little too often, but we'll say that this person isn't quite like that. It's more in the normal bell-shaped curve. When they get their fuse lit, so I'm going to put here, we're going to put lit, L-I-T. The main thing for us to do when somebody takes off angry is to stay calm. So put stay calm there as your response to somebody who takes off. So they take off, we stay calm. Now, since staying calm is an emotion, what will be the best way to stay calm when somebody else is angry and getting in your face? Use what? You can't use rules and regulations and morality and willpower. The best thing to do is through imagination, get yourself in their shoes. See? That's why people who are good at this say, well, all I do is put myself in their shoes. And then I'm calm. And because I'm not fighting them anymore. I'm kind of on their side. So if you do that, so then you can stay calm here. And what they're going to do is ventilate. So put the word ventilate there. When you ventilate, what do you want the other person to do? You want this person to listen, right? I've never heard, now, usually I get a few more people. Let's just say that. When you ventilate, let's just do this one more time. What do you want the other person to do? Listen. Now, that seems so self-evident, and yet, why is it? It's rarely what we get. What we all agree we want, we rarely get in the way we want it. It's because it is too hard to do it on the other side of this interplay. So let me ask you, what's your name?
John.
John. Okay, John, I'm just going to ask John to do this little demonstration with me. So John, yes, put up your hands, please, and just let me push on them. So when I push on John's hands, what does he automatically do? Pushes back. And when I let off, what does he do? He lets off, right? I mean, that's normal. Wouldn't you say that's just normal behavior? Here's the thing. Even though I told him the equivalent of listen, he couldn't do it because natural impulses do not let you do it. That means you have to retrain yourself to be a master at this. For instance, this is what I said to John. I said, would you please put your hands up here and let me, now I'm emphasizing it now, I didn't at the time, but let me push on it. That's like a person ventilating. Let me push. Put your hands up if you want to, but let me push on them. Now I want everybody to put your hands up and say, pretend I'm pushing on your hands, and if you're going to let me push on your hands, what are your hands going to do? Do this, right? Because was he letting me push, or was he resisting me? Resisting me. And again, not a fault on his part, because it is the fault of every one of us, because it is our natural instinct, first impulse, is when somebody is pushing us, we resist. We push back. That doesn't feel like listening to them. See? So if we, through imagination, get in their place so that we're calm, when they are venting here, right, we don't resist. We still stay calm. We're on their side, basically. Then it's going to be real easy to do the key thing over here. The key thing to put over here on this side is we are now going to take the initiative and they will respond. And our initiative, first initiative we really take after listening to them, is to empathize. And I like the word empathize better than the word apologize, and I'll tell you why. Too many people think an apology is taken care of by the words, I apologize or I'm sorry. Because the only thing that ever works in an apology is the empathy in it, not the words, I apologize. Because you can say, well, I apologize, sir. You hear any empathy in that? No. So I apologized. Have you ever heard people say, for instance, if you lower your voice, they will lower theirs? Have you ever heard that? I've heard that taught before. And if you really analyze it, it is not true. Now, you can conclude that if you were to videotape people who are good at it and people who are bad at it, you would easily see the people who are good at it lower their voice, and the other people tend to lower their voices, and these people tend to raise their voices and get more strident, and it only makes the other person angry, and we end up in a pretty strong altercation at the top of our voices if we're not careful. Over here, we see that on the film. And we say, what happened here? And it's real easy to say, well, what happened is he lowered his voice. Did you see that? Oh, yeah, worked the charm. So we get that out there to all the people. Research shows if you lower your voice, they will lower theirs. Well, try lowering your voice and say something sarcastic. See? It's not the lowering of the voice. What happens to your voice automatically? You don't consciously lower your voice. You lower your voice if your imagination is on their side, and you don't if you're not. And to not be on their side and force your voice down sounds downright phony to people. And they'll just get angrier. So it is the what in an apology that works, not the words, the empathy. The empathy then is the tone of voice and body language that says, I'm on your side. I'm not fighting you. There's no resistance here. And when you feel that way, your voice automatically goes down. You can't help it because you're not doing this. So with those illustrations, doing this versus this, not lowering your voice, but lowering your voice, but being on their side, then we can easily say that if they feel empathized with, not apologized to necessarily, but if they feel empathized with, they will cool off. It's also the natural response to empathy. When you're angry is to cool off. That's the natural response. We want natural responses here. The only place it's not natural is here, but through imagination, all of this becomes natural. That's why imagination is very powerful here in dealing with angry people, because we use it all the way through here. So now that we come down on this side, this is cooled off. Then, only when we cool off, I want you to put the word listen here, because they cool off, they can listen. They can't listen when they're not. We're on their side of the picture here. Are you with me? You put cooled off here. The next step is they will listen. So now they're listening because they've cooled off. They don't listen when they're not cooled off. Would you agree with that? Only then can we go over here and explain. So if there's some explaining to do, the computer was down, the doctor didn't show up today, we had it down on our calendar on the wrong day, whatever your explaining is, sounds like arguing when it is done too soon on this side, when they're ventilating. It sounds like you don't want to listen, you just want to do this. But once you have validated their feelings to some degree and shown some empathy, and you're over here on this side, and they have cooled off, then when you give an explanation, they're ready to listen to that without only making them angrier because they're not feeling that resistance first. Makes sense, doesn't it? And then, of course, when you get down here to them having rational behavior, you can solve the problem. And so you can say problem solve and thank. I like the word thank. You should be able to thank a person who was angry if you've successfully gone through this model. So let me tell one more story just before we go to lunch. And you follow the steps in this curve as we go. Okay? So there's your curve. Here's the story. The nurse manager called my wife, director of nurses, and said, a man down here has gone completely berserk. He's out of control. He threw something at the nurses, and he's been screaming and yelling down here. We can't seem to placate him, and he wants his sister taken out of this hospital. He wants to sue the hospital, and we've had a real disaster down here on our hands because of this person, and he's on his way to your office to see how he can take his sister out of this hospital and probably make some threats on you. Well, she said, well, what happened? And they said, well, you know, what happened in only 10 minutes because we were in his sister's room and she was just fine. Now she's disoriented. She's been disoriented for for a day and a half, and we're trying to figure out why she's so disoriented. But she was no threat to anybody, and we thought she was pretty good, and so we left her room. 10 minutes later, he walked in, and she had torn off all her clothes and was lying naked on the floor and sobbing and crying, and she had smeared her feces all over the place. And so that's the sight that greeted his eyes, and he completely lost it. Started screaming and yelling about how he wouldn't treat a dog this way, and he was going to get them sued, and who did they think they were if they thought they were nurses, and on and on. And when they tried to explain anything to him at all, he just got even angrier and angrier, and now he's on his way to your office. Well, she refers to this model just like that through the years, and said it's been so effective to her in dealing with anger that she actually, not that you relish dealing with somebody, but it's like you have so much confidence when somebody angry is coming down the hall. It gives you one more chance to show how this really works. So it isn't like she's wanting to run from this. It's like, okay, what do I have to do? I need to, through imagination, get on his side, not be on the nurse's side at this point, be on his side, so that when I hear this, I don't get defensive, even though I know the nurses didn't probably do anything really wrong, and so forth. He storms into her office, and he says, are you the director of nurses? And she said, yes, I am. Would you like a seat? No, I don't want a seat. What kind of an excuse do you run for a nursing department around here anyway? You ought to be fired, and I'm going to sue you people, because when I walked in this morning, this is the condition, and then he went into the story I already described to you with his sister, and he said, that is inexcusable. Well, now she said something slightly different than I would have. She said, this is what she said. She said, oh, how awful. And then she said, and if I am ever in the condition of your sister, I sure hope there's somebody like you in my life that'll fight my battles for me when I can no longer fight my own. Now, see, that's like another notch above being good at this. It's like going to the place, because this guy's totally out of control. How do you validate a person who's totally out of control? And when she said that, it was with such sincerity and with such honesty, because it has to come naturally, obviously. You can't just can these things. He stood there for a minute, and then he got big tears in his eyes, and just like that, the rage was gone, and then he wanted to know what is wrong with his sister. And she said, I know that you've had a really bad experience here, and I know you want to transfer her to another hospital, and I don't blame you. She says, if that happened to me, I probably would have felt the same way. But let me ask you this. Do you think nurses in another hospital will be much more prepared than ours? Because they called me just before you came, and they said it was 10 minutes from the time they were charting in her room and she was fine, and you walked in, and in that 10 minutes this happened. Caught them all off guard completely. The only way we could have prevented that would have been to restrain her in the night, just because she was disoriented. And since she was no threat to herself or other people, and the worst she could do is maybe get out of bed when she shouldn't have, or lie down on the floor because she didn't know what she was doing, or soil her bed, or whatever it was, that she might do something like that, but she was no danger, they didn't think, to anybody. And so it is so frightening to tie a person up who's disoriented and doesn't know why they're being tied up, that if it was my sister, I would not want them to tie her up unless she was threatening to kill herself or somebody. And so that's what I'm wondering. If they go to another hospital, I'm not sure they would do anything differently, even though it was a terrible thing that happened. Well, he thought about that. Then he says, well, if I leave her here, and he gave a list of some of the things that he didn't like, other things, that all piles on and comes out. She says, I'll talk to the nurses about that. I'll talk to the nurses about that. And he left her there. And when she came back and talked about it, she said, people never apologize for their behavior. They don't even remember how they behaved. What sticks in their mind forever, probably, however, is how we behaved when they behaved poorly. Now, talking about this concept, how many of you recognize this up here? You've seen this before. This one, right? Not very many. Have you ever read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Well, it's in there. It's also in the time management stuff that Franklin does in Covey, the Franklin Covey people. And they make a big issue in time management about something that it really applies to what we've been doing here in these 3 days. And it's nice to look at it that way. And the way I would start by thinking about it is to have you think of your to-do list for just a minute as I'm talking. Your to-do list. Those things that were on your plate that made it frustrating for you to be here these 3 days. I mean, obviously, you went ahead and came and participated all that time. But what was nagging at you that you would have done if you weren't here? So now with that to-do list in your mind, you could see that you could take the items on that to-do list and you could put them into one of these 4 categories, right? Those things that are important, but they're not really urgent right now. And we define something urgent as having a deadline on it. Those things that are important and urgent, these are usually things with a deadline and a crisis is involved. I mean, you're really up against it, you procrastinated or whatever, and you will have to stay up and burn the midnight oil if you don't do it. And then those things that are not important, not urgent, and then those things that are not urgent and not important. So urgency and important being the divider. Now the stuff that we did here fits in what category? These whole 3 days. Everything we even talked about fits in these. It has nothing to do with crisis and it is never urgent. The conclusion being that the things that are most urgent, the things that are most important, right, are held hostage by the things that are urgent. The things with deadlines on them, like some deadlines here that are not even urgent and not important, and of course some of those deadlines up there. Those kinds of things hold hostage the things that are really important. I would like to add to the things I've said today is that one of the things that fits in that category of important but not urgent is prevention. Urgent things are things that we are in a crisis facing because some prevention didn't happen. In other words, a crisis happened because there was no prevention built in. We can be so held hostage by everything being urgent and in a crisis for us that we never have time to do the really important thing, which is to prevent that crisis in the first place, and to talk about prevention. In the story that I told about my wife's experience with the guy who, in this hostility curve or this bell shape, this guy that went ballistic, she still had another loop to do after dealing with him. What loop did I not talk about? What's the loop that's missing here? I just quit the story and stopped, just like that, right? A little abruptly, I thought later, Why did I stop so abruptly? Because I meant to go on to say the next step. What would be her next step after this? Follow up. Go and have a conversation with the nurses, too. Don't you think the nurses feel battered and worried and scared and what's going to happen, and are we going to get a lawsuit, and are we going to have to testify or whatever, because he was making all kinds of threats and yelling when he left their area. So the next step is to go down there. Now, they need some empathy, too. When she talked to this person, if a person watched her handle something that was about nursing, they might get the impression that she's siding with the patient. And there's a real tendency on the part of us as managers to have this notion that, well, I'll decide how much empathy to give when I get all the facts, when I know the whole story. Isn't there a tendency to do that? It's like I withhold empathy until I get all the information. You're obviously angry, but I don't know the details. And so I said, well, I'll look into it. I'll look into that. I'll sure check on that. And that's what that person is hearing. And all they are trying to do is get their story to us to get us a little angrier, and we're calmly sitting there. I'll check into this. I'll write this down, make this note of this. I'll go take care of that. And then you go to the nurses and you say, now what happened? I heard his side. I want to hear your side. Well, let me give you a little mental image. I love these pictures and stories and images because they stick so much longer. If your house was burning down and it was on fire, and the chief of the fire chief arrived on your front lawn and walked up to you, and the fire trucks are there and their engines are running, but nobody's getting off the trucks. And he comes up to you and he says, now what happened here? and the fire's burning. And you would say, well, the house is on fire. Do you have to really know what happened right now? Couldn't you put out the fire? Well, no, we kind of like to know if that's an electrical fire or, did you have some rags in the garage? Now, you see how ridiculous that sounds to us? That's a great mental image for the way to think about dealing in a crisis mode with a highly irate person. You might be able to say, let me figure this out, to a person who isn't enraged. But an enraged person is a fire that is burning. It has to be put out before you can do anything. And if only empathy will put it out, anyone watching you sounds like you are siding with them and you haven't heard the whole story yet. What about us? So you need to understand that. The first step is to put out the fire. Then you sift through the ashes and you say, what happened here? Now you get the whole story when it's all calm now. This person's even gone when you sift through the story with the nurses. So you get down to the nurses' department, and I say, boy, did I have a person who was irate at my doorstep, but just to let you know, he's calmed down now, and he's going to leave his sister here. I'm sure they weren't that happy to hear that. But just to make sure I understand what all happened, tell me what happened. Not what did you do wrong or why did you say that or whatever. And so you go through sifting through the ashes and then you decide what happened. And the purpose of figuring out what happened is ultimately to what? Prevent it from happening again. So the final question is, well, now that he's going to leave his sister here, right? What are we going to do to prevent this from happening again? And now we have a discussion in the group of bruised people who have been empathized with their director and said, isn't it awful how on a perfectly fine day, boom, something like that can just go all haywire. And you can just have somebody in your face and all kinds of threats, and everything was going great, and 1 second later it's gone. That kind of empathy, they need that too. So our staff needs empathy, but to withhold it, waiting till you have all the facts, is usually a mistake unless you have a very calm person who is simply factually presenting you a problem. Then you can obviously do that. Now, what prompted me to say that partly is that Paul, I'm sitting by Paul here, and he tells me that he actually used that ballistic curve yesterday when he left this meeting. And I thought, well, please tell everybody about that. So Paul, stand up and tell them about it. I want to put you up. I know he's a little shy here. Do you want to just talk from your seat?
Yes, I'm very shy.
Oh, you are? Okay. I doubt that.
I'm accustomed as I am to public speaking. Each of us handles irate patients from time to time, and we're different skill levels at that. But yesterday, I had a patient that fit exactly what Fred was talking about. Got back to the hospital, CT scanner was down, this lady driven in from out of town, we couldn't get her to tell her CT was broken. She drunk her barium, all that kind of stuff.
Yuck.
You've had it, okay. She had already reduced my front office person to tears before I got there, and she was just looking for somebody else to do that to as well. And I walked in, and she was very irate. She told me she'd driven in from out of town. Nobody told her that it was broken. At which point I'd start to say, well, we didn't know ordinarily, and other things. But I just listened for the first time in my life. But I really just listened to her more than I ordinarily would have, and got some more information of things that she was upset about. And then we got into what had happened with the scanner, understood, the barium issue, and because she had told me if I made her drink more barium, she was going to puke it on the front desk. And so we got into just how terrible that must be for her to have been prepared for this. She's ready, she's done all this prep. And
now this is you empathizing with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And she really just calmed down much more quickly than people I've talked to in the past who I tried to explain too early what had been going on. So thank you.
Thank you. Good example. All right. Mother Teresa on greatness once said, we can do no great thing. We can only do small things with great love. And I don't think that it is wrong to use the term love. We use the term empathy here. We've talked about compassion. And then we have an airline that has a sticker, their ticker code on Wall Street is LUV, love. Anybody know what airline that is? Southwest Airlines. So if Southwest can build a culture around the word love, we usually think of, well, this is a theological thing. It's something, well, it fits Mother Teresa. But if it fits Northwest Airline, we're somewhere in between those, right? And we're far closer to the Mother Teresa kind of work that we do than we are to the work that Southwest Airlines does. And so to say something like, we can only do small things with great love, I think is a wonderful statement.